Cielle Folsom-Scott, founder and artistic director of UpHEAL Innertamment. I thank you for joining me today for this interview and chat with Emmy Award-winning writer, producer, and director Henri Giles. Henri co-authored Singing the Lord's Song in a Strange Land by the late Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowery, published by Abingdon Press. Here in October 2020, I was inspired to embark upon a project to honor the birthday, life, and legacy of Reverend Lowery. Among a great many places that he fought for civil and human rights, Reverend Lowery came and marched and protested on several occasions in the late 70s and early 80s against discrimination, injustice, and police brutality in my own hometown of Wrightsville, Georgia. As part of my project, I sought out his co-author in hopes of learning about her experience in collaborating with Reverend Lowery on this book. She so graciously agreed to share with me and to allow me to share with you. Thank you again, and please stay tuned at the end of our chat for more information about my Lowery project and about Giles's work. For those here watching, I encourage you to get the book. There's so much rich history to be enjoyed among the pages, about which we will discuss now. Let's go to my Zoom chat with Henri Giles.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's good to meet you virtually.
I know. Same here. Nice to meet you too.
I'm here today, and I'm caught up virtually with Miss Henrietta Giles, Henri, and she is the co-author with the late Reverend Dr. Joseph Lowery on his book, Singing the Lord's Song in a Strange Land. So thank you so much, Henri, for joining me today. Tell us how you came to this project with the late Dr. Lowery.
The way that this project came about is sort of, I guess, by accident. I was attending a function and I was having a conversation with one of the editors at Abingdon Press.
Okay.
And she was expressing her interest in wanting to do a book project with Reverend Lowery. And she kept saying, I really want to do something with him, but I really don't know how to reach out to him. I don't know if this is something he would be interested in. So I told her that I actually had formed an earlier relationship with Reverend Lowery with some other projects that I was working on. I told her I'd be happy to reach out to him, but I'd like to work on this book project with him. I made a phone call to Reverend Lowery, and he said, different people have asked me about doing this, but I don't really feel like I have that much to say, and I'm on the other end going, oh my God, you're Reverend Lowery.
Right.
Yes, you have a lot to say. You have said a lot, but I think just the thought of putting it in a book form was something that he was just a little apprehensive about. Fortunately, I think he had some conversations with his family. With his daughters. I remember him telling me that they were instrumental in his decision to go ahead and do this book. So I was thrilled to be able to report to Abingdon Press that Reverend Lowery had said yes, that he would move ahead with this idea for a book. I talked to him to ask, okay, what do you want this book to be about? This is your book. I am here in the capacity to just help make this happen. So what's the story that you want to tell? So we had a few conversations, and we decided that this would be a book of his sermons, where he would pull some of his many jewels. So this would be his chance to look over his life, as impossible as that probably was for him, to look over sermons that he had delivered in the past. He was able to identify some key sermons that spoke to the moment. He saw a lot in his lifetime. And so a lot of the messages and the speeches and the sermons that he delivered were delivered to audiences in many instances to calm, to even excite people, to motivate people to do certain things. And so, with the backdrop of the civil rights movement and different events that happened in this country, from his childhood up until adulthood, he was able to identify some key sermons that spoke to the moment. It was a tough decision because you can imagine someone like Reverend Lowery, the archives that he would have. So how do you narrow this huge body of work down to a few sermons to touch on what's happening in this country? It was a joy to work with him. I mean, first of all, I was honored. I was honored to be able to work with him to help tell this story. In fact, the title of the book, Singing the Lord's Song in a Strange Land, that was 100% Reverend Lowery's idea, because I had come up with a different title. And he was okay with that for a while. And then later on, we had a conversation and he said, this is, I think, what I want to call it. And at first I thought, Singing the Lord's Song in a Strange Land. I knew that there was a biblical reference and I knew what that reference was. And I thought, wow, that's pretty much on point. That certainly sums up what he was wanting to say. It summed up having to create your own narrative in a space where you're not welcome, where you're not respected. And so his title was far better than mine. I thought mine was pretty good, but then when he said, no, this is what I'm thinking of.
Psalm 137:4 says, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. The group Commission, they did.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. That was one of their earlier albums. The name of the album was On the Winning Side, and they did the song Strange Land. Beautiful song. Beautiful song. And it just kind of made me think of that. And I said, well, it's perfect for his life. And tying in the challenges that he went through and the struggles.
Yes, and it also speaks to the lives of so many Black Americans. Even when you go back to our first arrival to this country, we were definitely a people who were forced to sing a new song in a very strange land.
Very.
And there are so many ways that you can dissect this title, but it's a perfect analogy of Reverend Lowery's life, and it's a perfect analogy of the journey for Black Americans.
He defines strange land. Any situation or environment, any system that denies the sovereignty of God and the dignity of his children is a strange land. Any condition that places the material above the spiritual is a strange land. Any society that bows down at the shrine of racial supremacy is a strange land. When he comes down and he says, likewise, singing the Lord's song is more than carrying a tune in the right key. Singing the Lord's song is doing the right thing. Singing the Lord's song is turning the other cheek when we know that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth will leave us blind and toothless. Singing the Lord's song is building on a faith that will not shrink, though pressed by every foe. That's powerful, because I know me as a person and my personality. I think I kind of teeter somewhere in between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Had I been coming up in those times, I probably would have been over there with X and all of them that was armed and out there and like, listen, you're not gonna be running through here trying to intimidate my people.
Right.
I have so much appreciation for the concept of nonviolent social change, but I wouldn't sit and lie and say, my heart, my understanding, and my appreciation for it is one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Practicing it is quite something different.
It's different. I tell you, you do have to, your faith certainly has to kick in
Yes,
to
yes.
make you even embrace that way of thinking, that whole nonviolent way of responding to something. There has to be a higher power, because I'm with you. I'm leaning more toward Malcolm some days. You
Right.
come at me the wrong way, and so I have to center myself to
Uh-huh.
think, okay.
It's tough. In that whole concept with the strange land and singing the Lord's song, with all that has transpired in 2020, how do you feel like we're doing? It compares to the stories that Dr. Lowery shared with you and what you guys were able to share in the book. And where are we with this strange land here in 2020 and singing the Lord's song? How do we begin to turn the tide in America and the world?
I think we have turned the tide a little bit, but I still think we are inhabitants of this strange land. And I think until some of the disparities and inequities that Reverend Lowery referenced about what constitutes a strange land, until we can get past some of those issues, I think we will continue to be inhabitants of this strange land. And the key is, do you remain an inhabitant and just more or less be weighed down by everything? Or do you sing a song? Do you adapt to your surroundings? Do you adapt to the strangeness? Melissa Harris Perry, in her book, she talks about the crooked room and how Black women have to encounter these crooked rooms, things that aren't right for us, these rooms that the world has constructed for us to inhabit. And so if we're in a crooked room, everything is crooked, and we are constantly trying to right ourselves to be able to navigate these uneven spaces. And so to me, her analogy of the crooked room is similar to the strange land. It's all what you decide being an inhabitant of this strange land. Do you sing a new song? Do you come up with new strategies? Do you vote? Do you run for office? Do you try to be this agent of change?
Just a thought came to me as you were talking about that. Oh man, what is the term that Michelle Obama? What is that term she uses? I so love her concept. She talked about it's the whole concept is about, it's just about a strange land and being out of place, but she uses a term to describe the whole phenomenon. She says that a lot of women and a lot of minorities and that we go through, and she talked about reaching to heights in her educational career and her professional career, and being that person in the room and feeling like the odd one out and feeling like you don't belong. And then it tickles me so much. And she says, you sit there, sit there long enough and you listen to other people. She's like, no, he doesn't belong.
Exactly.
And realizing she's every bit as sharp as some of the other people in the room.
That's right.
And of course, being of her stature or whatever, just being in places where you're going to be a lot of times the only female, the only African American, the only minority, whatever. And so she's probably gotten used to that. But I want to find that she has a term for it. It's just not coming to me. But I still love that
I
particular.
can't think.
I'm gonna come up with it. identity. Michelle Obama too talks about a
Is it imposter identity,
thank
or
you.
imposter syndrome?
Yes, that's
Mhm.
it. That's
Yeah.
it. You feeling like you're an imposter, you like you just told
Like you don't belong
you're a
because
fraud and
you're
you just
believing the hype. Yeah.
right.
It's where we have internalized that for so long from what others have said about us. And
Yes,
so we
that's
start to believe it. Like, I don't
yes.
belong. Maybe I don't deserve this top position. Or and as she said, once you're there and you see how others operate, it's like, oh yeah, I clearly belong here.
Right.
They're the ones who
It's kind of having to reshift your whole thinking about your identity and
exactly.
who you are and where you are in life. Were you able, as a writer, as a storyteller yourself? I guess my question is how you come to it professionally and do the work, and still, as an African American, step outside the stories. Was it a point of getting emotional and having to sit with, these accounts he was sharing?
There were several things that we talked about where just the gravity of it was a lot. It was a lot to process, especially with him talking about his life, his early life, and
Mm-hmm.
growing up in Alabama during Jim Crow, and during a time where Black people were not respected at all. And so hearing those stories from when he was growing up, those were very touching. You have to you look at the person now and what you think about that person, and so your heart hurts when he shares a story about how he was disrespected as a young man, how certain challenges were put before him, but yet having the strength to want to press forward. So it was hard hearing some of those things. And I'll tell you, talking with him was really like talking to a family member, like maybe an uncle, a grandfather, even. Every conversation that we had, I always walked away at the end going, wow, yeah, I was just so moved and so fortunate to be able to have those conversations with him. It's not like we talked every day. We would talk periodically when I would come across some information, or if he would send me some information, we would have a conversation about that. So each time it was just a joy. And one thing that probably a lot of people do know, especially if you spent much time around Reverend Lowery, is that he had the greatest sense of
Oh
humor.
my God.
Yes, yes.
I've watched, yeah, and even in researching for this project, I've watched so many videos of him at different award ceremonies and sermons, and I'm like, this was a really comical man.
He was. He would say some things sometimes that I wasn't expecting him to say, just a quick wit
Uh-huh.
or turning a phrase about something. And I would be sitting there going, gosh, I can't believe he said that. But it would be so funny. And so he had a great sense of humor. And I'm sure people who were really close to him
Uh-huh.
could tell you more about that. But just the relationship that I had with him, just the time of working on the book, I certainly was able to pick up on some of his quips and some of his comical lines. Not only did I work with Reverend Lowery on this book, but I also had the great fortune of including him in a documentary that I produced on Black sacred music. It's called Reflect, Reclaim, Rejoice, Preserving the Gift of Black Sacred Music. We look at this genre and explore how this art form that's 400 years old, how it has permeated so many different forms of music in this country. And so, of course, when you think about the Negro spirituals and some of the older gospel tunes, you can't help but think of how that music supported and influenced the civil rights movement. I wanted to include his voice to talk about that, to talk about how did this music impact you? How did this music impact the movement? And so he gives a very poignant explanation about how this music supported them, even when things were looking pretty dark, how this music lifted them and gave them the strength to move forward. So I was so honored to have him be a part of that film. And we taped the interview with him at his home. And so that was an added joy. And he visited with us afterwards. And I think the younger people on the production team, they especially received a treat of being able to just sit there and listen to him share stories about when he was younger and more involved in the civil rights movement, the development of the civil rights movement. And so that was a true joy for them. It was a true joy for me as well. But being able to share that time with him in his home was really special.
I can imagine. You and I talked on Saturday, and afterwards I was able to go and watch that piece that you did on sacred music, and I thought it was just beautiful, just really good work. The interviews you did, the one you did with him, the older lady there singing. Oh, the just the whole documentary, that whole project just took me back home. All that was just, it just took me back to grandma. It was so familiar to me, watching that, just going back and knowing the stories and tying it to the stories I've heard from my parents and my grandparents, and just how it just really makes my heart, my heart cry. Your heart both cries and rejoices. When you think about We Shall Overcome, he was certainly an overcomer.
Yes. Yeah,
absolutely. And to have lived to be 98, and oh man, when you talked about earlier him saying he didn't know if he had anything to say for a book, I'm like, huh?
No, that was my reaction. That was my reaction. In fact, I used to tell him, you need to write a memoir. And he would just sort of laugh. And I said, no, I'm serious. And I want to write it with you. Because there are so many things in the book that we didn't touch on. We didn't touch on a whole lot about his, his upbringing and his family life. It's referenced in there, but I wanted to go a little deeper in a different project, and unfortunately, we did not get that chance.
Wow.
To do that. But I think I look at this book as a gift that he left us. That, he used to always talk about, marching orders. You have your marching orders. We know what to do. We know what we have to do. I think this book, with the collection of sermons, is almost like he did leave us marching orders, giving us examples of things that he had done, giving us examples of different events where he was either honored, someone was honoring him, or words that he spoke to different groups, different crowds, different audiences. So I think years from now, people will be able to pick up this book and have a sense of what Black people endured, not only what we endured, but how we endured it. He has just left us this remarkable roadmap. And so I'm grateful that we have this written testament to reflect on his life, but also look at it as a guide. He was always so happy to tell you about his relationship with President Obama and how he felt when he received the Medal of Freedom. And he just saw so much. He saw his life go from being born into segregation and just total racial hardship to, fast forward to be able to witness the inauguration of the first African American president.
Certainly.
And to develop a relationship with him, to almost be like a mentor to him. And so that's pretty remarkable in the span of a lifetime.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that somebody like you that has a background in media and film and broadcast and writing had the, like you said, the honor and the opportunity to get to, collaborate with him. Touch on. I know he did a lot of work, as did most of the freedom fighters, voting rights. And as we're here on the eve of his what would have been his 99th birthday, and being on the heels of an upcoming presidential election, I'm reminded of his extensive work towards voting rights. There's a section here in chapter 4. It's called "Economic Power of the Vote," address at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference Annual Convention. New Orleans, Louisiana, July 30th, 1995. On the 30th anniversary of that march that gave us our voting rights, we marched to remind us not only of the pain and suffering that gave birth to the Voting Rights Act, but also of the pain that comes when we don't use that right, won 30 years ago from Selma to Montgomery. We can never again let a minority of voters put in power people who are in a mood of malice and who are willing to turn back the clock because we are willing to sit down on our rusty dusties and not get up and exercise the right we won 30 years ago in Selma. Wow.
that speech could have been given yesterday.
Right. And that's
the relevance of it.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you. What would you say to that? Just kind of you're connecting with him about voting rights and where we are now. Where are we in your mind with that and how it references what he talks about?
One way to look at this is, you sort of walk away with the thought of the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so while we have certainly changed, we have seen changes in our society, in our culture. What he touched on, what Reverend Lowery touched on, about turning back the clock. We see that. We hear that. People talk about dog whistles, and there are no dog whistles. What we hear at the top of this administration, there are no dog whistles. Those are bullhorns of wanting to turn back the clock, of wanting to suppress the vote, because that's, when you look really closely at this whole issue of voting, voter suppression is very much alive. It's very real. And so what Reverend Lowery was talking about in the 90s, we are still having that conversation now, of turning back the clock, not voting, how we are losing races with very small margins. And as he said, if we get up off of our rusty dusties and vote, we can make some changes. And it's not always those national positions, but it's those local and state positions that we need to focus on as well. And so that passage that you just read is just so incredible, because that speech could have been given yesterday. We are still dealing with some of the issues that Reverend Lowery and his contemporaries dealt with. We've seen the Voting Rights Act, practically gutted. So it's like, what were we fighting for back then? We're still having this conversation about our votes being suppressed.
It goes back to what you said. The more things change, the more they remain the same. He alludes to that, I noticed, in several places, in the book, and different stories that he shares. And I think one of the funniest stories to me was him talking about how they love to have us entertained in a lot of the same context where they may have disdain for us for just for the color of our skin has been the history, but will very much come and hear us sing or watch us dance, or he didn't talk about the dance.
We're the entertainers.
Right. And he talked about Ambassador Young going down to South Georgia, and I just thought it was so funny, and Young running for governor and telling him, man, I thought I was going to win. The white people turned out. He thought they were coming to vote for him, to support him in his gubernatorial race. And Lowery was like, they came to hear you preach.
There's a difference.
Even though they might enjoy the preaching, they might enjoy the singing. He said they will walk for miles to come hear the singing. But in terms of coming and joining a Black church, not happening, because that's just not going to work. So the good thing about Dr. Lowery in his book and just in a lot of his speeches, and I think this is important to note, that he's really fighting for all people. And just for human rights, not just civil rights, African Americans, but human rights, and especially for poor people. And he talks about Dr. King's work, and that's when he was actually killed, and when he was out on the battlefield for the sanitation workers, and Lowery seems like he had a genuine heart for just seeing people have their basic human rights, all people, all people.
Exactly. Yes. For everyone.
Tell us a little bit about your life, your work outside of your literary work. I know you and I had a conversation, but viewers that may not know what you do and what your background is.
Okay. For several years, I worked as a writer, producer, and director, and I was based in Nashville, and worked on a lot of different programs, a lot of different shows, most of them entertainment or news magazine formatted shows as a writer and producer. After a while, I started freelancing, and fortunate enough to, to continue to work on a lot of different shows and programs. One of the shows that I worked on was the Oprah show. And so I was a freelance field producer for a few years for that show, which was very rewarding.
I'm sure.
The topics and the stories that I covered were pretty incredible. The life that I led during those years, all of the years that I freelanced, I used to always just say I have a home base, and that's Nashville, because I was never home. I traveled a lot, started working independently on documentaries, which I love. I love that particular format. A few years ago, I was approached to join the faculty at the University of Tennessee at Martin, which is about 2 hours outside of Nashville. So now I teach in the communications department at the university. I teach writing courses. I teach documentary storytelling, film appreciation type courses. And it's a new chapter in my life, and I am enjoying it. I'm very happy to be sharing what I've learned over the years to the next generation of media contributors. And in addition to that, I always tell my students that I'm kind of like them. I'm also a student. I'm in the final year of my PhD. So I'm working on my doctorate from the University of Memphis.
Do you get to sleep?
Very little, very little. That's what I said, man, I'm not going to know how to act once I complete this program, because so much of my life the last few years has just been teaching and studying and writing papers. And so I enjoy it though. I'm able to examine things that I have observed over the years while working in media and often wondered why. Why does that always occur? Or why are we always portrayed in a certain way? And so now in my scholarly work, I am able to explore those concepts a little bit deeper. And so I'm enjoying it.
That's awesome. You've got quite a storied background there. I had read online about you doing some production work with Oprah's company. That's highly impressive. And to have that honor and that distinction, Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Just
Thank
really,
you.
really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're doing this project to
Well,
honor
thank you.
Reverend Lowery.
Thank you so much.
So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and you enjoy and just stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
Okay.
You and your family. Yeah.
Okay, well, take care.
Okay. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.